Most companies don't fail because the director's bad at business. They fail because the director leaves things too late and then fear takes over. And that's exactly what happened in this case. A solid engineering business, decent clients, reliable work, but behind the scenes, HMRC debt was spiralling. His overdraft were maxed out and the director was completely overwhelmed. And by the time that he actually reached out, HMRC had climbed up to about 275,000. Supplier debt was mounting and a compulsory liquidation was becoming a real threat. And if he'd have waited even a few more weeks, he could have lost every bit of control over the process and maybe would have lost his house. Now this director had been struggling for months. He kept trading. He was genuinely trying to fix things. He took on debts that were personally guaranteed. He juggled payments and he was working harder than ever. But when he finally watched one of our videos like this on YouTube, he picked up the phone. And that was the moment that everything started to change for him. So if you're watching this and you're behind with HMRC, you're avoiding letters, or you're hoping things that will magically improve your business, I think you need to hear this story. Because it could easily be you. Now let me talk to you about this business. It was an engineering company. It was based in the Northwest. It had a fairly strong order book, but the cash flow was collapsing around him. Now, over the last 12 months, he'd sort of buried his head with HMRC. He wasn't paying PAYE, he didn't pay last year's corporation tax, and he was struggling to pay VAT. He'd failed on time to pay arrangements, which is where he tried to set TTPs up and not been able to complete them. And his overdraft were almost used up. Now suppliers were waiting longer and longer for payments and he was constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul. And this just left him stressed, overwhelmed, and he's gone into ostrich mode. He's working his tail off, but he's not dealing with the problems. Now it wasn't a failed business in that sense. It was a business that was suffocating by debt and he had taken his eye off the ball. Now, when we talk about the real numbers, okay, we had corporation tax 200,000, we had VAT 70,000, we had PAYE at 30,000. There was a bank overdraft 19 grand into a 20 grand overdraft. He owed his trade creditors 8 grand. He owed his accountants a couple of grand. So the total unsecured debt was over £300,000. And he'd taken over £50,000 in personally guaranteed debt to try and prop the business up. Now, on the other side of things, it's like, well, what did the business own? Well, it had a little bit of machinery. In the assets, it was £7,000. And he had a big overdrawn director's loan account. He owed £165,000 to the company. Now, the business, it was cash flow insolvent, so he couldn't pay his debts when they fell due, and he was balance sheet insolvent. And that's basically, if you added up all his liabilities and all his assets, the liabilities were more than his assets. And there was a moment that everything shifted for this guy. Because for months, he'd just been running around thinking, right, I'll work myself out of this, I'll work myself out of this, it'll get better, it'll get better. But he eventually watched a video, and the video that he watched was about basically HMRC enforcement. Because if you owe HMRC today, and this is going to go out I think in December 2025, like they are winding up businesses for a lot less than 300 grand. Like I've seen winding up petitions go out for £35,000. It's never ever happened. And in our video, we basically explain to him that if he doesn't act, all control is going to be taken from him. At the moment, he was in control. But the minute that winding up petition lands on your doorstep, things get a lot more serious. So he rings us and he goes, Chris, I know I've waited too long. I need some help. At least he'd reached out. And that call was a turning point. Because once you know the truth about where you're at, and that's what I do with people, I say, listen, let's see things as they are, not worse than they are, not better than they are. So we need to go through the numbers. And that's sort of the first step. Right? Give me an age creditors list. Who exactly do you owe money to? Out of all those people you owe money to, who have you personally guaranteed? Let's have a look at your balance sheet. Now, I hope that you use something like QuickBooks, Sage, Free Agent. Please, please have management information. Everyone should have a bookkeeper. And that's so on a monthly basis, you can see whether your business is making money or not. And we were going through things, and this guy just hadn't recovered since COVID. He'd lost some long-term customers, his costs had gone up, his staffing costs had gone up, and he just fell behind. And instead of dealing with it and sort of admitting it early, he was a proud guy, he couldn't. And the problem with his director's loan account is he needed a certain amount of money to fund his lifestyle. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. That's what it was. There'll be people out there that are taking money out of the company that the company can't afford. And that's why his director's loan account increased. So we had a look at current cash flow. Is there any way that this business can survive? And the reality was, it was, there's like, they call it the sunshine test. Listen, you might be insolvent, you might not be able to pay your debts when they fall due at the moment, your liabilities might be more than your assets. But the thing that I want to ask you is, do you think that the sun will shine again for your business? Do you think the rain will stop, the clouds will part, and you've got money that's due in perhaps in a few months that will tidy this stuff up? Now with this guy, there was no hope of doing that. His debt exposure was insurmountable. There was no way we could refinance the assets to put some business into the company. And the conclusion was, in this current guise, there is no rescue viable. The HMRC are going to wind this company up. And if they do wind the company up, he loses control. Now, the next thing we looked at, it was like, okay, well, potentially could a CVA work? And the reality is, remember, a CVA, by the way, company voluntary arrangement, is where you formally negotiate with all your creditors and get them to allow you to pay them back over generally 5 years. And you've got to go to them with a proposal showing cash flows of how, if they support your business will get back to profitability. But given the market conditions and the amount of debt that there was, it was fairly clear that a CVA would get rejected, and there was no real benefit to the director doing a CVA. We had a look at administration. Administration is where you can do admin in a day, and it's a wall of protection around the business. But the conclusion was pretty clear. There's going to be no rescue buyer. There's going to be no ability to refinance. There was no cash flow to actually fund ongoing trading, and even if he went into an administration, the reality is he wasn't going to be able to buy the business back. So it was decided that the best option was to do a creditor's voluntary liquidation. It's a liquidation, it was a full stop at the end. It was a sensible and safe path. So what we had to do is, first of all, we've got to get him prepared for liquidation. So we moved fast. We got all the information, all the aged creditors and what they were owed. And we helped him put together a statement of affairs, and we explained the liquidation process clearly. And what happens is, in a liquidation, there's a big shopping list of information that we need off you. And an insolvency practitioner cannot get you into liquidation until you things like anti-money laundering checks, and they have all this information that they require. And we basically told them, listen, now you're insolvent, you've got no hope of recovery, you've got to be careful, your duties have changed. You need to stop taking money out of the business, you cannot sell those assets, or if you do try and sell those assets, they need to be valued independently by an agent. And this guy decided that he didn't want to do that. And you need to communicate with your staff as well, because the staff are going to be made redundant, okay? So we had a conversation with all the staff. We told them that they'll be able to claim redundancy pay. For those that have been there over 2 years, it's sort of a week or a week and a half per year served, capped at £719 per week in December 2025. They'd all be able to claim unpaid holidays that have been accrued and not taken. They'll even be able to claim for unpaid wages, and they'll also be able to claim for notice pay. And this is essentially, they'll be able to claim because they've not been given the correct notice period. Now, none of the staff could make a start on their claim until it was the creditors' meeting date. And on the creditors' meeting, they get a case reference. We was able to speak to them on the run up to that to sort of guide them through and give them some comfort. And then they was able to make the claim on the creditors' meeting. Now, once we got all this information, we also got in the middle with a few creditors to basically tell them that what was going on. And we supported the director through the legal steps he was about to take. Now, once we had all the information, we brought the insolvency practitioner onto the call to go through things and how it was going to pan out. And his liquidation notices were given for signature. He signed them and sent them back. And 14 days later, there was the creditors' meeting. And that's where the company went formally into liquidation. His director's responsibilities were over and the insolvency practitioner took charge. Now, there was a thing called an overdrawn director's loan account that I mentioned at the start. And this is the scary bit for most directors. And he owed over £160,000. I'm just going to get my computer on here. Now, even though he owed £160,000, on day one he thought, I'm definitely going to lose my house. And he'd spoken to other firms and they didn't really want to go into a great deal of detail with him on this. And it's because an insolvency practitioner, they're not really allowed to advise you as a director. They can advise the company, and that's a big difference that people need to understand. They're there to advise the company. They're not there to advise you, the director. And they can only really review directors' loan accounts once you've appointed them. Now, the problem for you as a director is once you've appointed an insolvency practitioner, it's really down to their discretion. So what I like to do with people is I help directors understand how a liquidator approaches a director's loan account. And the first thing I'm going to look at is is this director's loan account that's 160,000, is it legitimate? Like, have you claimed are there any expenses that you can put through that are legitimate that will bring this director's loan account down? And we got basically a balance sheet, thankfully, that was up to date, and there was no way that this director's loan account could be brought down. But then we went into with the director and go, right, let's have a look at what your personal asset position. Now, this chap, he had a house worth £590,000 with a mortgage of £346,000. So in there, you'd think his equity, when you factor in I'm going to say this word not to scare you, you've got an ability to do a deal with the insolvency practitioner on an overdrawn loan account settlement, as long as your proposal is a better realisation for creditors than bankruptcy, okay? Now, when someone is being made bankrupt, the house is generally sold for less than it's actually worth. So in this bankruptcy calculator that I did with the director, his house wasn't worth 590,000. In a bankruptcy scenario, it'd be 530,000. So the equity was 184,000. Now, obviously, he owes 160,000, so he's thinking, well, I've lost my house. I'm going to be made bankrupt. But that's not where the story ends. Now, to sell a house, you need to conveyancing, £3,000 plus VAT, and to sell the house is 1%. So when you took those costs into consideration, what was left was 174,000. Well, his wife had nothing to do with the company. Therefore, the insolvency practitioner can't go after his wife's equity. So we're left with his equity, which is about £87,000. And again, he's like, well, Chris, I'm going to be made bankrupt, aren't I? Because they can get £87,000. Well, again, even that scenario is not likely, because there are costs to make a director bankrupt. Most directors don't understand this. But to make this guy bankrupt, it would have been petition to bankruptcy, that's £2,000 plus VAT. The official receiver's cost is set at £6,000 plus VAT. You've got a thing called a trustee in bankruptcy, and they will take at least 15% of any of the realisations. And then you've got the solicitor's fees. Let's say it costs 15 grand to make this guy bankrupt. Well, the total cost in this scenario would have been £40,000. So his available bankruptcy was bankruptcy was 87,000. His available funds were 87,000. Well, it was going to cost 40 grand to make him bankrupt. Now, in addition to that, he owed £50,000 to a personally guaranteed debt. So if he was made bankrupt, the insolvency practitioner would only get a portion of the available funds in bankruptcy. And we managed to help him settle his director's loan account of 160,000 at 22,000, and that protected his home. And honestly, the stress that we took off this guy, it was night and day. No one else would do that for him. Now, you've got to be really aware that when we're helping people understand the positions on directors' loan accounts, it's about you giving full disclosure. If you tell us something that's untrue, it will get uncovered post-appointment by the insolvency practitioner. And if you say that your house is worth 500,000 with a 200 grand mortgage, and actually it's worth £1 million and it's got no mortgage, if I've given you an indication of what a settlement might look like, that's based on you telling me the truth. Because once the insolvency practitioner comes on, they've got to investigate. If you've said anything that's untruthful, the outcome will be different. Now, the reason why the liquidation was the correct route in this scenario is there was no business coming out the other side. Obviously, the HMRC debt got written off. Sadly, the supplier's debts got written off, but they were insured. The bank overdraft was personally guaranteed, and once he went into insolvency, he was able to pay that personally guaranteed bank. I think he owed 19,500 at the time of liquidation, and the bank actually settled with him at £10,000, so he was able to get a discount. Obviously, there was a structured process with this overdrawn loan account, and there was no forced closure. There was no HMRC winding up petition. So he got ability to regain control. He was able to speak to us. He was able to speak to the insolvency practitioner. And it allowed the director, although it was sad, it was a reset. You know, his business was over, but he could breathe again. And what it meant to this guy, listen, before he spoke to us, he couldn't sleep at night. He had anxiety. He was on medication with a doctor. Fear every time the post come. Worried about HMRC turning up. And he was working himself into an early grave. Now, after the liquidation process began, he told me he felt massive relief. There was no more pressure. There was a clear plan. He had mental clarity. And he was able to get on with his life with some dignity. Now, most directors never realise how heavy the burden is until it's gone. But I want you to listen to this. I think this director waited too long. The truth is, if he'd have waited any longer, he'd have been wound up. He should have spoke to us months ago. Please don't bury your head in the sand. One phone call changed everything for him. And it can do the same for you. But you've got to act before the situation forces your hand. Now, I've talked about overdrawn loan accounts here. If you've got an overdrawn loan account, I want you to go and watch this video here. It's going to tell you everything you need to know about overdrawn loan accounts, what they are, why they're a big problem for you in insolvency, and how we can help you understand them and potentially settle them. Thanks for your time, Chris Worden.